Of course, it's not the first time the central bank governor, Godwin Emefiele, via his once in 3 months communique of the MPC, always accused the banks of not transmitting credit monies into the private sector, and says they've gotten so much headroom, but they're not lending. Of course, that looks like an open secret, isn't it? Let's get a bit of this conversation with Ayodeji Ebo, who is the managing director at Afrinvest Securities. This is part of the pillar of the conversations we started yesterday. Ayodeji, good morning. It's good to have you here.
Yeah, good morning.
Let's start this conversation from this angle, and then we're going to transmit. Well, each time the central bank says banks are not transmitting, whether it was reduction in cash reserve ratio or whatever monies they get to the private sector, what comes to your mind?
Yes, I think this is, in the first place, you want to identify reason why, if there's an opportunity to make money, why the banks won't take the opportunity. When you look at what has been, credit that has been advanced in the past, most of these banks have been struggling with high impairment charges. We saw average impairment charges rose over 100% year on year based on 2016 numbers. And it's, the reason is not far-fetched. The banks lend to the economy, and when you see with the challenges the economy has experienced in the last 1 or 2 years, you discover that for most businesses to survive, it's very difficult. So as long as some of these risks continue to exist, I don't think the banks will be willing to take that step to advance loan to some of these businesses. If you look at it on a sector basis, the oil and gas space, which accounts for a significant chunk of their credit, you notice the fluctuation in terms of crude oil prices. Even the downstream sector is not being fully deregulated, and as such, the potential within that space have not been fully unlocked. So if the opportunity in terms of the margin that will make most of these companies be able to pay back without having to call the bank to restructure or having to get the loans go bad, then I think the banks will not be willing to continue to just lend into that space.
Is it right, is it correct, this word on the street or this sentiment that the banks in Nigeria favor the big boys and big businesses as against the poor man or the middle income man? Is that correct? And its businesses?
Yes, I think it boils down to risk, and in terms of managing the firm. So for instance, you have a 1 billion naira to lend out. You may prefer to look at, though you may say concentration risk, to identify 10 firms that already have track record you've seen in terms of their cash flow over the last 6 months, over the last 3-4 years, and you are sure that in terms of the revenue, they will be able to pay back. There's something instructive that I'd like to mention is for most of these micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises, for most of them, in terms of there's still that knowledge gap. So for a typical microfinance, for a typical small company, you discover that for most of them, they don't even keep records of their sales. So if you are approaching the banks that you want them to advance you credit, in the first place, what is rational to ask, what's your daily sales? From your daily sales, you can be able to see what will be your cost, and you can be able to ascertain their margin. For most of them, they don't keep records. When you do a proper analysis of most of these micro, small, or medium enterprises, for a lot of them, they may not be profitable. What they see is just the turnover. And most time, business is just beyond just the turnover that you see the number of customers coming. By the time you drill down into the numbers, for some of them, they've been using the share capital or the shareholders fund to finance the business. Is when it gets to a level that you have to go to the market to buy back either your raw materials or the goods you need to sell. That is at that point that they discover that there's no cash to go back. So I think that knowledge gap also has to be bridged.
There's still a problem here in terms of the bookkeeping, basic bookkeeping, accounting. due diligence, governance issues with medium and small enterprises in Nigeria? Do you think that's one basic reason banks don't lend to them?
I think that's one of the basic reasons, because you have to be sure in terms of to understand the business that they do. You also understand the cash flow for you to even know the kind of lending that you want to structure for those banks, whether it's short-term, whether it's long-term lending. You need to be able to know. You also need to be able to ascertain the margin for them to be able to, you compare it with your cost of cost, for them to compare to the cost of funds. That is very critical before the banks can advance loan. When you look for the major guys, you already see most of them are quoted, and there's, in terms of corporate governance, you can see the internal control is strong. So in terms of revenue leakages, for some of them would have been blocked to some extent, and the banks will be a bit comfortable to advance the loan, because when you also look at it, the deposit is a liability to the bank. We take our funds and we don't want the banks to come back and tell us that they can't pay when you want to withdraw your deposit. So they have to use it judiciously. They have to be sure that when they are lending to a certain level, the risk has been mitigated.
So we got problems with the formal banking system. Let's because of time, let's go down a little bit. Then we come to the level of what we called few decades ago, about 2 decades ago, what we call community banks. Right. Then we restructured the community banks and brought in the microfinance banks. And we thought this would work, and this should be able to transmit enough credit to the small and medium micro businesses, what we call one-man business, if you want to use the Nigerian parlance, roadside businesses, because these are very small. Do you think we've been really successful in that particular, in the second layer of this credit transmission to the real sector?
I think there's still a lot to do. Won't say they've not been a significant impact. For when you look at in terms of the lending by microfinance banks, for most of them, the cost of even the lending is significant, and that has factored in their risk. When you look at an average, they use per month, and when you go to the bank, it's always per annum. So they give you a flat, 10%, between 5 and 10% per month. And that's when you look at the charges. And when you analyze that, even if it's 5%, that's like 60% per annum.
Which is
significant.
higher than I will get a bank, a former commercial bank.
Yes, which is significant. They have also factored in the risk. So when you look at the average, that's based on your loan portfolio, you expect that maybe 20 or 30% will go bad. So when you look at it as a whole, you factor in that risk that you may not get back 20 or 30% of the loan that will be advanced. So on an average basis, they need to cover up, because there's a cost to the fund. The fund is not just free.
In other words, what the microfinance bank do therefore is to spread.
Yes.
Yes, because if it's going to be 30% risk in my portfolio, and I'm giving out 70%, so I'm going to spread the 30% on the 70%.
Very correct.
Of the credit I'm giving out. So actually, it ought not to be that high if I'm a small businessman borrowing from a microfinance bank. But because the microfinance bank is not sure whether Bosun will pay back, it decides to add my risk onto Ayo's cost, isn't it?
Exactly, because those risks are still very evident in terms of infrastructure. Most of them, you have to think about power, you have to factor it into your cost of production. And with what we've seen even in the last 2 years, the challenges, consumer power, purchasing power rather, has been waned in the last 2 years. So even when you produce, in terms of the sales, were very low then, and as a result, you are not able to meet up with your obligations.
Do you see a fault line here that the inability of the banks and the microfinance banks, I mean the commercial banks, is a function of the broader economy, really?
Yes, it's really critical, excuse me, in growing the economy. Part of what I think we've seen, like you mentioned, the social intervention programs. Currently, we have the Empower government trying to see how it can grow capacity, and also trying to see can help the graduates, the unemployed. But when you see this is just like a scratch on the surface.
You're taking us to the third level. You're taking us to the tier 3 now, because the commercial banks are at the top. The first year, everybody wants to go into a bank. Sorry, apologies for cutting that. They want to go into the bank, and I want to work through there because I have a bank account. So if I have a bank account, I have the right to apply for a loan, right? Or you call credit Okay. Well, I think we're very small. So I go to a second level, which is tier 2, which is the microfinance banks, right?
Bank, yeah.
And it looks like, well, we're a little bit stuck in the middle. So we go to tier 3, which is at the lower level, and which is now the government rolling out what you just called Empower. Previous administration calls it Shopee and UWIN. Decades ago, we had a few other initiatives. We had the People's Bank of Nigeria during President Babangida's administration. We had MAMSA at some point, which is the mass mobilization for social and economic reconstruction, I guess, something like that. Then we had the National Directorate of Employment. We've had Industrial Trust Fund. So we've tried almost everything, trying to reach the people at the bottom of the pyramid, the common man, since all these years, decades. But it looks like each time we try something, it doesn't seem to really alleviate poverty and give credit to the workman, one-man business, artisans, professionals who need this credit to grow on their own wealth and grow the economy on a larger scale.
Yes, you are very right. A lot of programs, when you look at in the past, and when you also look at what has been the impact of some of these programs, most times it only lasts as long as the government of that within that particular period. Had the Shopee, the UWIN program in the last administration, and now it's Empower. But one thing I feel government, for us to make more impact, it's what are the controls around some of these funds. So it's not just about identifying the unemployed and your advanced loans or what you call grants for that individual to set up a business. But most times you see that a lot of these people that access these loans divert the funding, and as a result, in terms of the output that you are looking at, the result is not always very tangible. So, and when you also look back, that even for those that diverted the funds, are there been sanctions to serve as a deterrent for people that are potential people that will be accessing these funds? I don't think you will find. So most people tag, when they see any fund, you have the Lagos State Employment Fund, they tag it as a national cake that let me just share part of government revenue. And at the end of the day, it will not achieve its intended purpose. And most times when you now do the assessment in terms of its contribution to GDP or multiplier effect, most times you really don't see that impact. So I feel rather than just most times come up with social intervention program, there has to be the control in our monitoring has to be very significant to achieve that impact. And we would looking at maybe an avenue how governments can also make it more impactful. We already have some cooperatives that are already in existence. Most of these artisans belong to several different cooperative societies, and for some of them, they borrow from their cooperative. They've already been trying to grow their business using the little money they ask based on their contribution at the cooperative level. So if you are able to identify some of these cooperatives, one, if in the first place, it narrows down the diversion. So for most of these people are already registered. And once you advance, you identify the ESCO members of that cooperative. You're able to advance credit to them. You're able to monitor through the cooperative, and you're able to see the impact.